Welcome back to Mix Monday. Today I am going to be giving you an in-depth walkthrough of my mix of the punk song Dangerous Mistake by 19 Times. So this is a mix and a master that I did a couple of months ago for my good friend Camden from 19 Times. Yeah, I'm just going to walk you through. We've got a rough mix that he did himself. I made quite a few changes. This was not necessarily the kind of project where you get a rough mix and you want exactly the same as the rough mix but better. We actually made some substantial changes to this mix, especially in the low end, as well as really compressing the hell out of the thing and trying to get it as loud, as slamming, as kicking as possible without sounding kind of too harsh. So I'm going to start out by playing a little bit of just kind of swapping back and forth between the rough mix and what we ended up with, just so you can kind of hear the difference. And then I'll go through track by track, section by section of the mix, and just kind of show you a little bit what's going on with these faders, with these buses, as well as the plugins that I use. Let's start out with the rough.
You kill me just for fun. You said I was the one. I am your puppet, your hands upon my strings.
This is now my mix.
You know every move
the rough.
to make. That evil smile rests upon your face, and this beautifully.
You can tell right away that it's just a lot more full. The low end is there. We cut out a lot of that harsh mid-range, a lot of that harsh upper in the guitars. It's really kind of twangy. Right around there, you know, in that kind of 1,000 hertz world, 2,000 hertz world. Let's take a look at what happened with the drums. We've got our drum bus here, a couple of tracks outside of it. Let's go ahead and solo our drums. Now you can see there's a bunch of these sample tracks here. The recordings weren't spectacular on drums. That's pretty common outside of, you know, a very nice studio with a good recording engineer. Let's take a listen to the original kick. It's a little reverbed out. It's a little bit clicky, a little bit. It's not very full. You know, we're doing punk. We want to feel the kick. We want to get some rhythm in here. So, you know, there's this feature in Logic where you can do Control D, where we can do Control D on an audio track. And it'll analyze the transients and make a sampled version of that. So you can see it generated one. We've already got that, so I'm going to Command Z here. We don't want to make two of them. And let's take a listen to what happens when we mix in our sampled kick. So without, with. Now that's automatically generated by Logic, by that drum track feature, and then all we had to do was come in, go into sampler, and then choose the kick sample we want to use. We did the same thing with the snare. Pretty thin, clicky snare. We're just filling that out. Let's take a listen to the toms. Nice little fill. Throw in some hi-hats. Again, sampled hi-hat. Let's take a listen just to the hats. With the sample. Just adding a little bit more body. Go take a listen to the chorus. Got a ride in here. Let's take a look at some of the plugins on our drum tracks here. So on the bus, I've got an EQ. This is just removing some kind of peaky spots where there was a little bit of kind of a harsh frequency, a little bit of a 100 bump to add a little bit more body to that kick, taking a little bit of harshness off of those cymbals, rides, hi-hats. Cutting out the low lows. We don't want a really subby kick. This is like an LA2A compressor. Really adding a little bit of crunch, but you know, we've got our mix sitting at 38%, so it's just a little bit of parallel compression on the drums. whole lot of squashing going on with the Smasher. This was a free plugin. Not sure if it's still free, by Pulsar, called the Pulsar Smasher. I mostly just use this on drums for a little bit of kind of saturation. I think we just got their preset on there. Then I've got IVG2 by Klanghelm. This is a saturation plugin.
Wonder why you hurt so bad.
Just add some thickness and some meat and some body. We got a gain plugin. I usually add these for automation, although it looks like we're just using it to get a little bit of passive volume in this case. And then we've got a limiter just for a little bit of peaks. That was probably just to keep me safe before I got the levels dialed in, playing with the compressors. Nice to have a peak limiter to make sure you don't blow your ears off. On our kick, we've got a little bit of high cuts, another little boost here to give some body, cut out the low lows. A limiter again just to protect our ears. And then I've got a transient shaper on here. I've got the kick D-click preset. This is the Auburn Sounds Couture transient shaper. I mostly use this on kick and snare, just to kind of shape the attack of our instruments a little bit. So let's just solo this in here with and without. We're increasing the sustain a little bit on this, making it a little bit of a wider, beefier kick. Nothing on the sampled drum, just mixed to taste with the faders. On the snare, we got a little bit of EQ in here, just a little bit of a mid-range presence boost to fatten it up in that area of the frequency spectrum. We got another copy of Couture on here, this time the snare just taking off a little bit of that reverb, reducing the sustain a little bit. On the sample, we've also got Couture just kind of doing the same thing to the sample to help it match a little bit. And then we've got a little bit of clean gain plugged in there. On the crash, it looks like I made the cymbal a little bit more mono. It was probably a little too far panned, and it looks like I tried to maybe move it over a little bit. But this is really just kind of some general imaging stuff, stereo feedback.
I'm gonna let myself make.
Now I mixed this from there's sort of some people in the mixing community like to pan your hi-hats to the left because that's how the drummer hears it. And some people pan it to the right because if you're facing the drummer, the audience is used to hearing the hi-hat on the right. Now some people will argue, oh, you should always do it from the audience perspective because most consumers of music would come from being a perspective in the audience. However, my opinion on it is most consumers of music aren't paying any attention whatsoever to what they're used to with the panning. And I've talked to some drummers who get kind of really uncomfortable and like triggered from the hi-hat being on the wrong side. So for the sake of my drummer friends, I put it on the left because for most people it doesn't matter to them, but then some people get a little annoyed by it. We've got our hat sample, little EQ, not even doing anything. A little bit of compression on it. Looks like the threshold, it's probably just on here for color. This was a few months ago, so it's either on here just to kind of have it go through something very subtle, maybe a little bit of peak if it's a really high velocity hit, and just adding a whole bunch of gain to get the volume to the right place. I like to play with these utility gain plugins in addition to the faders, just because the range on them is much larger, right? Your fader can only boost a couple of dB, whereas the gain plugins let you do up to 24 per instance. So you can get just like, if I really need to crank something to gain stage it, right? You know, I just use a utility gain plugin. Nothing on the crash, nothing on the ride. That wraps up the drums. So you can see I got a whole bunch of buses here. Let's talk about that quickly before we go into the bass and the guitars. So everything goes to bus 7. That's our master bus here. What I've got on here, I've got a multi-presser, squashing everything together, and a little bit of a reverb, gating that dry signal and adding a little bit of a room to the sound. when I'm doing any kind of rock music, right, you're not making this hyper clean electronic digital song. You are a band, and you want the band to sound like they're playing in a room together. So I do a lot of this little very subtle room sculpting with my buses, where I just kind of compress everything together, put it inside a room. I wanna make a space where my band's playing. So I got a little bit of reverb on here, a little bit of multi-band compression. I use the Logic Final Pop Compressor preset. It's a little bit sparkly. Just we added a lot of low end in this mix, so we still kind of want to maintain, give it a nice little bit of sparkle on the top end. So just a little bit of boost, upper mids, the treble frequencies here. Not too much squashing, pretty low ratios here throughout. Pretty much every track goes to that. I exempt the sampled instruments because our computer instruments are not actually in the room. They are just a little bit of studio magic. Next one on all these drums is going to be bus 3 and bus 1. Bus 3 is our bass and drums. So the bass and drums get in here. I'm just kind of compressing this low end a little bit. I want to take out, and this is all just in parallel, right? Let me show you both plugins together so you can see how they're working together. This is just for the room. I'm basically adding a little bit of compressed, squashed, low-end reverb. It's super quiet, very subtle. Let's go ahead and solo it. I'm not even really picking this up on my monitors at this level. You can hear it. You can hear it if you have a nice low system, but it's just adding a little bit of kind of low end and warmth to those bass and drums. And then bus 1 is I've basically got 2 drum buses here. So I've got a stack, which in Logic is a drum bus, and that was the first thing we went over. So this is drum bus 1. We've got a lot of parallel compression in this smasher. And then in drum bus 2, which is a send, I've got something similar to our master, where I've got a little bit of parallel compression, and then I've got a little bit of room sound, just very subtle, very subtly mixed in here. It's very quiet. It peaks around minus 26 dBs here in the chorus. With all of these buses, and we'll talk about all of them, we're just adding a lot of times to really add and help build out our entire mix. That's the drums. Let's talk about the bass. Let's go ahead and solo our bass. Let's take off our 2 plugins. Sounded pretty good. We like the tone. We don't want to mess with it too much. You can see a whole bunch of stuff on here. None of that was on. This is just my bass preset, and we've got an amp. I can really crank it and adjust it if I want, but we liked the tone, so we just have a little bit of TDR Nova. This is a free dynamic EQ. Just pulling a little bit down in that 100 hertz world where the kick lives. So when the bass gets a little too low endy right in that spot, we want to pull it down, just kind of riding that frequency range so it's not really getting in the way of the kick too much, and then a little bit where the guitars and the vocals live, around 1 to 5K. And then I got a limiter on here, adding a little bit of gain and clipping us so that we don't get too loud. This is going to our master bus, drum and bass bus, as well as our bass bus. Again, you're going to see a pattern here, a little bit of parallel compression, and then that parallel compression goes into the room. It's just a little bit of room verb. Let's go ahead and solo these. Let's take off our EQs here. Super bright, super mid-rangey, super harsh. Let's go through one by one. So this is just our little secondary guitar in the chorus here. Our lead. Didn't do too much to this one. We did a little bit of stereo widening. Just pulling that out a little bit, but for the most part keeping that tone. You hurt so. And then we've got our 2 rhythm guitars, so these are really shredding kind of punk guitars. First thing we did, saturation. This is the same Klanghelm saturator. You can already tell that just immediately thickens them up, adds a little bit of low mids. The saturation kind of adds some harmonics that kind of help tame out a little bit of that harshness in the upper mids and just kind of more evenly distribute across the frequency spectrum. A little bit of dynamic EQ here, really pulling out those upper mids. Just making that sound beautiful, getting rid of that wee whining sound right up there at 3 kilohertz. And lastly, we've just got a static EQ doing a whole gigantic mid-range, lower mids, lower frequency boost, adding body to these guitars without. All you need is just a standard stock EQ, and you can just add body to an instrument immediately like that. Just saturation, subtractive EQ, additive EQ, done. Completely changes the sound. Thin and whiny to full bodied. Sweet. And all that's left is the vocals. So here's our vocal chain here, and what I did was I was on a trial version of Nectar at the time. I now have the full license, but what happened was I ran out of days on my trial, so I had to do a bounce of the vocals before my license expired. So this is the original track, right, with everything on it. Although then I had to bounce it to maintain use of my Nectar license before it expired, which I have now purchased fully. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what it sounds like after everything.
And you might find me in the places deep.
So I've got a little bit of gentle auto-tune here, nothing crazy. We're not going to T-Pain. Very high flex tune, very high humanized. We want to be subtle. We don't want anyone to think we're posers, but secret's out. Auto-tune is on every vocal that you've ever heard in your life. Not every vocal, but it's so much more common than you'd think, and it does add tone. Okay, so when our retune speed is this high and this long, we are not really getting any active tuning. What we are getting is a little bit of tone of going through the plugin. Next, I've got Nectar, no pitch, no gate, but a little bit of subtractive EQ, just kind of taking away some problem areas in the frequency spectrum. De-esser, an additive EQ, just adding a little bit of air and breath. And then a compressor, a pretty aggressive compressor out of Nectar. I do like the Nectar compressor, but as you can see, there's more fun to be had. I do play a lot with compressors on vocals. They all have very interesting tones. I've got a very lengthy video going all through this stock Logic compressor. But here I've got a Studio VCA, so a pretty transparent compressor to start, medium threshold, decent ratio, and we're adding a little bit of distortion. So we're doing a little bit of clean peak reduction, compression, as well as some coloration, and we've got that fully mixed in. Second compressor in the chain. Got a classic VCA, a little bit less transparent, a little bit less control, no distortion, again, just a little bit of color. It's going to be subtle. Much lower ratio, so much less aggressive peak taming. Again, just changing the tone a little bit. Then we've got a gain, which I believe I was using for automation. No, I did all the riding in this track, so this was just adding a little bit of clean gain after all our squashing. And then it was stereo, and we were just kind of squeezing it more toward the center, getting it in your face. After I bounced it, I added a little bit of dynamic EQ here.
And you might find me.
Again, that 3K range was a huge problem area in the rough. Let's take another listen.
You might find me in the places deep.
So we're just trying to control that in the vocal as well. Get rid of a little of that kind of nasally world. And we've got our automation gain. So this one is used for just cutting out some stuff. I believe this is from the clean mix.
Chords on your shitty ass guitar. Chords on your guitar.
So there we are, cutting out a swear word for the radio edit. Kind of funny. So that's what that gain is for. And let's quickly talk about these rhythm section buses. So on our vocal bus, parallel compression, very aggressive clip distortion mixed in just a little bit. And as you can see, we're not even getting any of the dry, just a little bit of real crunchy verbed vocals kind of mixed into the room. This is our strings and guitar bus, basically all the rhythm instruments. Compression, a little bit of that parallel compression mixed in, but again, mostly just that room sound. And then on our guitars, forgot to mention this, we've also got, so this is a cool trick that I learned from Warren Hewart, produced like a pro on YouTube. What you do is you take your left guitar and you send that to a reverb on the other side. If I solo both of these, you can hear the reverb on the opposite side. Now what does that do? When you play both of them together, it adds width. What happens is the reverb for one guitar is on the opposite side, and then you get a little bit of Haas effect there from the slight differences in the two source recordings, and then having them kind of play on the other side helps them sound wide, but also sort of blend together on each side of the stereo spectrum. So, we're not hard panning here. We're still a little bit, a little bit toward the center, but having that reverb split gives us a nice fat wide tone. Now, all these buses, they're super subtle, even if we play them all together. And what happens is we almost get two mixes, right? We've got our dry mix and then this room that we're playing in. And that sort of simulates real life, right? We've got our band playing together on the stage, all their amps, or, there's no reverb in punk, but they might be playing in a big hall. We've got some people in the room, a little bit of reverb just kind of swimming around, and this is what it sounds like when you're in the bathroom at the venue. Kind of leaking in from the room you're playing in.
And you might miss me. You might.
It just adds body, it adds life, it makes it sound real, it makes you sound like you're in the room, and it helps connect you to the mix. So there you have it. We'll take one more quick listen to the rough and then our final product. I lowered this a little bit. Let's crank it a little bit to hear it. It sounds great. It sounds full. Mastering was in a separate session. We've just got a limiter on here. Make sure we're not going too hot. I was originally doing a little bit of kind of pseudo mastering on here, playing around with ozone and some limiters and exciters. I ended up taking that into another session and doing mastering as a separate process. Maybe we'll have a video for that. But this is Mix Monday. That was the mix for Punk's song Dangerous Mistake by 19 Times. You can check that out in the link below. I hope you enjoyed this mix walkthrough. Doing a lot of work with faders. A lot of just kind of EQ in this one, taking out some of that harshness and adding a ton of body to that low end, really building out that drum tone to be more full frequency spectrum, helping that bass get a lot of character, and thickening up and toning down those guitars a little bit, the brightness on those guitars. So hope you enjoyed. Hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, night, whenever you may be watching this, and I'll see you next time.